Ephesians chapter 5. For the last couple weeks now, we've been on a teaching series to help each of us to grow in our faith. Well, we want to grow in our faith, and our journey began with our salvation. Now, we know the foundation of our faith is Jesus. That's what it's all based on. But our journey of faith began the moment we're saved. And for us to grow in our faith, for us to build our faith one block at a time, it has to start with our salvation. And not just being saved, but knowing for sure that we are. Beyond a shadow of doubt that we have a personal relationship with Jesus. Then last week we kind of built on that a little bit, where we're saved and we know that we are. So now we're ready to give testimony to the life of Jesus and be identified with Him through believers' baptism. So we want to follow up with that with believers' baptism, just to be a witness to the world that, hey, I belong to Jesus. Well, today as we go into, I'm a little hesitant to tell you what comes next. Because if we're going to look at this as steps of growing, salvation, everybody can say, amen, I agree with that. Baptism, maybe I've never done that, but I know that's good. I'm going to stay there. But I'll tell you what. We say, okay, I'm saved, I've been baptized. For us to look at what we may say the next step, I'll have to tell you, I'm just a little hesitant. Because I'm afraid you'll take it the wrong way. I'm afraid you'll misunderstand so I didn't even put this in the title. I thought about it. But here it goes. If we're going to grow in our faith, then there's some folks who need to quit dating and get married. Simple. If we're going to grow in our faith, there's some folks that just need to quit dating and get married. Now, before you get up and walk out, before you start throwing things at me, I'm not meaning in our earthly relationships with someone else. I'm not talking about, now maybe in your case it may be. Maybe you'd be like the lady that one Sunday years ago, she came forward at the end of a service, and she looked at me and she said, Pastor Dan, I want to grow closer to Jesus and be closer in my walk with Him. I knew the lady, I'd known her for a long time, so as I prayed with her, I looked at her and I said, so what are we going to do about that man you're living with? She looked at me and she said, well, maybe growing with Jesus isn't that important. Because she wasn't about to change that sinful relationship. So maybe in our lives there's something going on that shouldn't be, and we know to be obedient to Jesus. We can't grow in our faith with that. But what I want us to look at isn't that earthly thought of marriage. I want us to talk about our status in the local church. Are we married? Did you know that the word church, the Greek word is ekklesia. The word church is found 110 times in the New Testament. 110 times. 100 of those, it's talking about the local body of believers. It's talking about that local church. It's talking about that congregation that meets together in the same place. Maybe it's the church at Lydia's house. Or maybe it's the church on the hill. Or maybe the believers that meet together at Old Fields Baptist. But it's talking about 100 of those 110 times, it's talking about that local body of believers. And here's what I know. If the local church is going to be mentioned that many times in Scripture, then it's important to Jesus Christ. So we have to ask ourselves, what is our status in the local church? Let me show you what I mean from God's Word. We're in Ephesians chapter 5. We're going to start about verse 25. Husbands, love your wives even as Christ also loved the church and gave Himself for it, that He might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that He might present it to Himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourished and cherished it, even as the Lord the church. For we are members of His body, of His flesh, and of His bones. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, Let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. You know, as I look at that passage, and as I look at what that tells us, I begin to see some great teaching there. And there's a lot of stuff that we can take from there. It's definitely talking about our relationships within the scope of marriage here on this earth. So we can look at that and we can see so many things. You know, it's part of it is talking about that marriage that has when a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. He's talking about that earthly marriage. And if you look through those verses, verse 25 tells us, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. So it's a great advice there for husbands to love their wives. And Christ had a deep and sacrificial love for the church. So it's telling husbands, love your wives with that deep and that sacrificial love. Verse 28 it says, so ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. So as it tells us, as husbands, love our wives as much as we love ourselves. I know a lot of guys that love themselves a whole lot. Love your wives in that way. So we look at it, we see there's a lot of good advice here for married couples. And the passage I read, this is Paul's advice for the husbands to love and to have with her. I didn't even bother to read about the ladies. Because if I'd have read to you verse 22, where it says, wives, submit to your husbands, we got guys here that would never get past that. They'd harp on that verse for the next week or longer. But we could look at it and we say, okay, this is great advice within the scope of marriage in our earthly relationships. But I want us to go deeper than that. I want us to look at this passage to find the deeper meaning. And it doesn't take long. It's not hard for us to see that. I want us to look at the relationship between Christ and his church. And to do that, the very first thing that we need to see is the church is the bride of Christ. We need to understand the church is the bride of Christ. Let's look at some of these verses. Look at verse 25 again. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and gave his life for it. When I look at that, where the love that Christ had for the church was one so great, go a little further, he gave his life for it. Christ loved the church. And now let me tell you what the church is. The church is the born-again believer. It's the one that has entered into a personal relationship with Jesus. The church is not a building. The church is the born-again believer that meets together in that building. It's the word ecclesia means the called out ones. So it's those who have been called out from sin, out from the world, out from the realm of Satan, those called out to be committed to Jesus Christ. So as we look at it, those that are called out, it says, love them as Christ loved the church. Now, if we look at the church being the bride of Christ, we see that Christ has a great love for his bride. Why? Go a little further. That he might sanctify it and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word. He has this deep love for his bride so that he can sanctify, so that he can cleanse it. Because that he might present it to himself a glorious church, having not spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that he should be holy and without blemish. Christ loved the church so much, he loved you and I so much, that for his bride, he gave his life. So that our sins can be forgiven, so that we can be presented as the bride of Christ, holy, perfect, without spot or blemish. We all know we're sinners. It doesn't take us long to figure that out. That's part of our life. Nobody had to teach us to be bad. It came natural. But if we were to present ourselves just as us, we couldn't even stand before Christ. But the church is his bride, and we who are born again are presented to him holy, perfect, without spot, not because of us, Not because of a prayer we prayed or a time we went to church, but because of Jesus Christ who died on the cross for us. So as we look at these verses, we see that the church is the bride of Christ. And he died so that he could present us to himself. Holy, perfect, without spot, without blemish. Go down to verse 30. For we are the members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. So he tells us here, we're part of his body. And it goes on in verse 31, it says, just like a man leaves his father and mother to cling to his wife. And we know how that works here in marriage on this earth. You know, a man's going to leave the home as his father and mother. He's going to take to him a wife, and the two are going to become one. You know, they're going to become one in marriage. Christ says, you are part of my body. As his bride, as that born-again believer, he intends for us to be at one with him. But you want to know how the Scripture really tells us that this passage is more than just about husbands and wives. Look what the Apostle Paul says in verse 32. This is a great mystery. Did you get that? This is a great mystery. But I speak concerning Christ and the church. Now, if we were to take the first part of that, there are some married folks here that probably would say, it's definitely talking about my marriage. It's a great mystery. I still haven't figured it out. But it says concerning Christ and his church. This passage is deeper than just the way a husband loves a wife or a wife loves a husband. It's deeper than the scope of marriage that we have on this earth. It's talking about Jesus Christ and his bride. This passage is talking about the love that he has, that deep sacrificial love, so that as his bride we can be presented to him pure and holy, blameless, perfect, so that we can grow in that. But as we look at it, and as we see the things that he tells us, we realize the church is the bride of Christ. But I want us to see something else here. Not just that the church is the bride of Christ. Because when I first said that, some of you are going, yeah, we knew that. We've heard that before. You've preached on that before. So what else do we need to know? If the church is the bride of Christ, then the second thing I want to tell you is that marriage takes commitment. Marriage takes commitment. Let me tell you a story. Two fictional characters. I kind of made them up. We're going to call them Joe and Grace. They met through a mutual friend. They seemed to be the perfect match. You know, immediately Joe was just fascinated with Grace and just couldn't keep his mind off of her. She was everything that he wanted. She was beautiful. She was outgoing. She was caring. All the things that he had looked for. She was exactly that. For the first 6 months or so, he couldn't think of anything but her. You know, he'd go to work, he'd go whatever, and the only thing on his mind was Grace. But now, we're about 3 years into that relationship. Joe's starting to have second thoughts. Maybe Grace isn't as pretty as I thought she was. You know, why does she want me to be with her all the time? And he starts thinking different things. She's not as attractive. He's starting to resent the time that she wants him to spend with her. One night in conversation, Grace looks at Joe. Says, Joe, where are we going in our relationship? And without anything else, Joe fires back. We're together, aren't we? What else do you want from me? You know what Grace realized? Joe wasn't ready for deeper commitment. And chances were, he probably never would be. Now, that's a story I made up. But I want you to know something. There's a whole lot of Joes out there. There's a lot of folks, they want to stick to the dating. They kind of look at dating as a trial run. You don't have to have the deep commitment. You get all the benefits, all the blessings. You can have the love, you can have the affection, but just don't have to be the total surrender there. There's a lot of Joes. You can have the companionship, but not necessarily all those emotions. And you know what those folks do? Those folks are like Joe. Once that awareness or that newness starts to fade, they're ready to move on. I just don't love her like I used to. I don't find her attractive anymore. And the list goes on. You've heard those things. That list just continues to go. As long as I get what I want, I'm here. But the moment I don't, I'm out here. That list just keeps going. There's a whole lot of Joes out there. But you know what I thought of? I thought it sure sounds like the church today. Not just marriage relationships as we would know them, husband and wife. But it sure does sound like a church. Greatest church ever been in. I've learned so much in the first 6 months I've been here, more than I ever did. About 3 years into it, I don't think that preacher's told us anything new the whole time I've been here. We sing the same old songs all the time. That church isn't quite as attractive as it used to be. I just don't have that feeling that I once did. Kind of sounds like Joe, doesn't it? So when we're talking about Jesus and his bride, we see there's a lot of Joes in church. There's a lot of folks that they're just ready for the dating. I did some research. Do you know what the average stay of an American who goes to church, not those who don't go to church, who've never been to church, but American who goes to church, you know what the average stay is in the United States? Less than 4 years. Now, if you think about it, because I know some of you there going, well, I've done beat that a long time ago. We have folks here who can say, I was here when they dug the hole to lay the first block. I've been here for a long time. Some of you have been here, I watch some of you sitting there counting. Well, I came in 2012, 30, 40, 50. You know, and so you're saying, well, I done beat the average. But think about it. And some of you can say, oh, I've been here 10 years. How many folks in those 10 years have you seen come and go? So you take the short ones and the average is a little less than 4 years. Why? Because we're dating. We come and as soon as the music getting a lot, it hasn't changed. It's the same songs. The preacher hasn't told me anything new. I just get so tired of sitting with the same people every Sunday. And they've passed the same offering plates for as long as I've been here. And the pew, it stayed the same color. Nothing ever changes in the church. I think I'll go on. Or you start hearing that preacher, he expected me to be a part of the ministry of the church. I don't have to do that. He expects me to give. Why should he even think I should give? I'm going to go to a church where they don't expect me of that. I'm going to go to a church where every Sunday they announce, now, if you don't want to give, you don't have to. That'll be my church. Then after they've been there a few years, we expect our folks to give. Well, I'll find me another. There's a whole lot of Joes in the church. Now keep in mind, we are the bride of Christ. We are his bride. Are we just dating? Because you see, in that dating relationship, there's no commitment. We look at the dating relationship in the church the same way we do it in the world. Now, I think the way we look at it in the world is wrong. I think there needs to be the attraction, the courtship, the dating, the engagement, and the marriage, and it comes in steps. By the time we get to the place where we're dating someone, we need to be looking at them and saying, you know what, I think I can marry this person. So there needs to be a serious, but we look at dating in America as just a trial run. Try this one for a few months, I don't like her, I'll just go find another. She wasn't nice to my friends, didn't like my truck. I'm just going to go somewhere else. But that's how we look at it. And we look at the church the same way. Preacher didn't like my sins. Said my truck was too loud. I'll go somewhere else. We look at it as dating. So we have to ask, are we dating? You know, when I look at Joe, it seems like a whole lot of folks I hear about going to church. Oh, now, preacher, I go to church because I can see my friends there. I've never missed a dinner since you started having them. I even listened to the sermon almost the whole time without going to sleep. Why do you think I'm like dating in church? As long as nobody rocks my boat, I'm good with that. But the moment you start preaching on stuff I don't like, one person told me, I can find another church. Sometimes I just wanted to say, could I give you a list to try? But you know what? Sometimes we look at the relationship that we have in the church as a dating relationship. We as born again believers, we are the bride of Christ. But we want to be his bride, but just be dating. We'll call them church daters. And I've come up with some characteristics of church daters I want to share with you real quick. A lot of church daters are often me-centered. You know, they go to church for the programs and the activities. They haven't missed a dinner since chicken was invented. They even come to that harvest festival because the kids liked it. But don't dare ask them to do anything else. Well, we become the me-centered. You know, what can the church do for me? I'll support the church as long as it's for me. A lot of times what we find from the dating, the church daters, they're often me-centered. The second thing I find is church daters are often independent. How about if I just do my own thing my way and everybody be happy with that? They go to church because they're supposed to, but they're very careful not to get involved. The church daters, you'll see them on Sunday morning in worship looking like them boys up here in the children's sermon. But they won't darken the door on a Wednesday night or Sunday night. You're not going to see them involved in the ministry. Why? Because they're independent. They don't want anything demanded of them. No ties. No responsibilities. And the third characteristic I find of church daters are often critical. They might be short on allegiance, but they're long on finding fault. They're the first ones to tell you what the preacher did wrong. They're the first ones to tell you whether the heat was too hot or too cold. They're the first ones to tell you this or that. Why? Because they're critical. They've only looked at church as a dating experiment. But here's the thing. If we are born again, we are the bride of Christ. And marriage takes commitment. Christ doesn't want daters as his bride. Christ wants commitment as his bride. Now, I can tell you that there's a lot of churches out there that they don't care if you're a dating Christian. They don't care if you look at the marriage relationship of Christ and his bride as daters. As long as you're there that Sunday and they can count your head and the number, they're good with that. If you put $1 in the offering plate when it comes by, that's even better. You don't, nothing's expected of you. You just be there. There's churches that they don't even have a membership list. If you're there that Sunday, you're a member. If you didn't come next Sunday, well, sorry, you weren't part of the church that week. And that's how they view it. A lot of churches are okay. But you know what? I think Jesus requires more of his bride. I think he requires a commitment. He wants us to serve him. You notice in this passage that we read, it talked about that we are his body. And just like a man loves his own body, we're to love his Christ. As part of that body, there's something expected of us. We're to continue. We're to be what Christ wants us to be. But you know, more than just that expectation, Christ wants us to be committed. He wants that we are his bride. We fully surrender to him. Verse 22. Remember that verse that I was afraid that if I read it, some of our guys just get so hung up on there for the wrong reasons. But let's look at the bride. Wives, submit to your husbands as unto the Lord. As the bride of Christ, we're to have that commitment of surrender. We belong to him. We're not satisfied with just dating the church. Folks, I don't think we should be satisfied with that. So I want to ask you, when it comes to you, your relationship in the church, are you dating or are you married? Because see, marriage, that's commitment. Every marriage that I've ever been a part of, every one that I've ever served as the officiant of, they say the same thing. Till death do us part. Now we might phrase it a little different, but it's the same thing. That marriage is a commitment. You know, I want to love, honor, obey, serve, and all the things that we put in there. Until I'm dead. That's what Christ wants from his church. And I think for us, there should be a commitment. So as I look at that, and we've been talking about our faith. We're building our faith. We started with our salvation. So the question is, have I been born again? That's your first question. Am I saved and know for sure that I am? Because folks, if there's any doubt, you don't go to church membership and baptism and all the other things we're going to talk about in the next few weeks. You start with salvation. Am I saved and know that I am? You say, well, yes, I am. Then let's go to last week. Have you been identified with Christ through believer's baptism? You say, well, yes, I've done that as well. If your answer is no, and you know that you've been born again, then you need to be baptized. You need to be obedient to what Christ teaches us. You say, well, now I'm saved. I've been baptized. And I really want to grow in my faith, so I want to ask you. Are you dating the church? Or are you married to it? Because we are the bride of Christ. And marriage takes commitment. So I want to ask you, just very simple. Dating or married? That's up for you to decide. As God's Spirit speaks to your heart, am I married? Fully committed to Jesus Christ? Am I committed to his church? Now let me tell you what we do here at Old Fields Baptist Church. I believe that it's important for us to say this is where God's called us to. And for folks that know this is where God's called them, then this is where we serve. This is where our commitment is. And for those that God has called here, we ask you to say, I'm a part of this church. I'm a member of this church. It's kind of like when you walk down the aisle of a church or a farmyard or wherever you tie that knot. It's part of that commitment. When you said, I do, it's kind of what we ask you to do as a church. As the bride of Christ, you say, I do. I'm a part of this church. And until God calls me away, I will be committed to his work at this church. So we have a membership. Now, maybe you have questions about that. You don't want me to take time this morning to go through all the things about church membership. But maybe you do have questions. So here's what I want to do. The first 2 Sundays of November, you can go and mark them on your calendar. First 2 Sundays of November, during Sunday school time, I want you to meet me right over here. Sunday school's at 9:45. So we're going to be here at 9:45. And I want to take you through our membership class. I'm going to do it in 2 weeks. All the questions that you have about being a member of our church, I want to answer those. What we believe, why we believe it. What we require of our members, or what we expect. You have questions about being a member of the church? First 2 Sundays in November, you just meet me right over here at 9:45. Maybe you're already part of a Sunday school class. Your teacher will excuse you for 2 weeks. I'll tell them to. But if you have a question, I want to meet you here. Because here's what I believe. I believe it's time for us to quit dating. It's time for us to get married to the church. We are the bride of Christ. Maybe this morning God's already spoken to you. As we sing a final hymn, it's just your time to say yes. Lord, you're right. I don't know why I doubt it. And follow Him. Maybe this morning it's an act of obedience. Maybe you're saying, I want to grow in my faith, but God's already revealed to you sin in your life. It's time to confess that sin, turn from it, and move toward Jesus. Maybe there's a burden that you've been trying to carry. It's hard to follow Jesus when we're all loaded down with a bunch of junk. So why don't we just, maybe as we sing, you want to come to the altar and just pray. Lord Jesus, here's my burden. I can't carry it. Maybe there's someone you want to pray for. Somebody you know that's not walking with Jesus. You just want to pray for them as we sing. Maybe your commitment's for salvation. And as we sing, you need to come and let this church know that you've accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior. And you want to follow the believer's baptism. Then I invite you to come as we sing. Or maybe as we sing, you're going to say, yes, Lord. It's time for me to quit dating and be committed to the bride. I'm going to be committed to you as my bridegroom. I'm going to be a part of this church you've called me to. And I will be there the first 2 Sundays in November to make that commitment. What's God laid on your heart? As we grow in faith, building our faith one block at a time. Salvation, baptism, membership in the local church. Father, thank you for your word. Father, I thank you for each person that's here today that heard your word. Lord, I don't know what you've spoken to their hearts. I know what you laid on my heart to preach. So I have to believe that you've put folks here today that you've spoken to them. Maybe it's about church membership. Maybe they've been dating for a long time. And it's time for commitment. Maybe, Lord, it's something else. Maybe it's sin that needs to be confessed, or they just need to follow you. I want to pray for each person that today they'll say yes for you. Maybe, Lord, there's folks that they just have burdens and they need to come and pray, or pray right where they're at. I want to pray for them too. In Jesus' name we pray.